But the interesting thing is Charlene and I are and Gail are all in the same building.
Oh.
Charlene is upstairs in Bond and Gail and I are downstairs, but we have an extra router. They actually installed an extra router in my office, or right by my office.
Oh, that's nice.
So Bill, I want to introduce you in the beginning. And so I went on your Vancouver Island place and
I forgot I had that. Oh no, I haven't updated it in years.
Well, so I mean, these are not whatever, but it says that what I wrote was that you've worked at 4 different teaching centers across the U.S. Is it 3 or 4 in the U.S.?
In the U.S. It's technically, let's see, 1, 2, 3, it's technically 4 in the U.S.
All right, well, I won't try and name those then. So, okay. Was there anything else? Yes, when you were teaching when you first started teaching, I thought you taught literature and writing. Is that true?
It included that. I did history of ideas was a big chunk. I come out of comparative literature, and so history of ideas was a big part of what I was doing, but included teaching literature and writing. And also French. I taught French for a couple of years.
You're kidding. Oh,
No.
That's cool. I did not know that. Hey, everyone. I see lots of people joining. Chris Lambert, hello. Randy, hi. It looks like a lot of people may be having problems with their internet, leaving your video off. But you can just unmute and say hi. Mike Lee, hello. Good to see you.
Hello. Hey guys, it's Randy.
Hey,
Hi,
Randy.
Joe. It's Chris.
Hey, Chris. I haven't seen you for a while. I see Randy all the time.
That's right.
We're on a task force together, so we're partners in crime right now. So, Bill, I will tell you that we have lots of different disciplines going to be represented today. Some of our heavy hitters on TBL are in other places that won't even be here. They're on vacation, which is wonderful. But so we will have a lot of kind of newbies maybe, and other people that who are using bits and pieces of TBL, which is great, in lots of different disciplines. So, hey, Walter, good to see you.
Hi.
Hello.
Walter, are you in town?
I am in town. Yeah. Just at home watching the kids, trying to get ready for the new semester.
Is that your swimming pool in the background?
No, this is a image from a deep sea robot that I use. I'm a marine biologist.
Okay.
So.
Awesome. Hey, Nan. Well, we will start in just a minute. Yeah.
Give me a sense, Joe, how many do you expect to be here? That might affect.
Yeah, probably somewhere around 20, something like
Okay.
that. I'm just paying attention to the drop off that we've had at other workshops that people sign up. So we have, I don't know, 30 some odd signed up.
That's pretty common. It's pretty easy to think you'll be available for a Zoom, and then you realize, oh, lo and behold, no, I'm not. So.
Yeah, that's all right. Hey, Rob. Rob Gailey, you're here. Kim Schaefer. So, Bill, you've actually met Kim Schaefer. We met at, I guess, a TBL conference together. I guess that's where that was, or Kim? Hey, Kim, where was that? Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember you, Kim. Where was that?
Was it Albuquerque?
It could have been Albuquerque.
Yes.
Or Florida?
Yeah, no, it wasn't Florida. Oh, yeah.
No, I didn't go to Florida for that conference. No, I think it must have been Albuquerque, but it feels like somewhere else we met.
Yeah, I think maybe twice.
Yeah.
Actually.
at some other conference, maybe a Lilly. Did you ever go to a Lilly?
No.
Okay.
WASC.
Oh, let's not mention.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. Welcome.
It's good to see you again.
I'm going to
Look
go
forward to
on and
this.
get started. Thank you all for being here. I'm Jo Clemens. I think I know all of you, but if not, I'm the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning. And so glad to have you all here. Just a little mention that some people are having problems with their internet, and if that's you, if the sound is choppy or something, if you turn off your video, that may help. We've had, you see a lot of people with their videos off. If you're not having problems, leave your video on. It's nice to see everyone. So this is Bill Roberson. He is an old friend of mine. And I would say, you know, my mentor. One of the things that I'm good at is figuring out who to follow. And Bill is one of those people that I went back looking at some of his presentations, and I remember one in 2011 in Atlanta at a pod conference. That may have been the first one that first time I met him, or it may have been a year earlier than that. But Bill is now up in Vancouver Island University. But before he moved there in 2014, he worked all across the US in 4 other teaching and learning centers, doing kind of what I do, but he is a real guru for team-based learning and teaching critical thinking. His area of expertise when he first started teaching a long time ago was in literature, writing, history of ideas. Bill, you want to fill in a little bit more of what it is that you really specialize in?
I really can't fill in a lot more other than those are broad categories. And I taught broadly. I became kind of a generalist very quickly because I wasn't heading down a deeply narrow scholarly track. And so I taught across different disciplinary lines. And part of what I do now comes a lot from having stepped over so many lines.
Right.
You get in the habit of stepping over those lines and become a little bit less intimidated by disciplinary definitions. And so that's part of what that speaks to. I won't say any more than that.
Well, I've seen Bill present many times. He and I've had many discussions. I actually went up to Albany to learn from him when he was at SUNY Albany to go through his training on team-based learning years ago, and have kind of imitated him for a long time. He has published.
I'm so sorry.
He's published several articles, book chapters on team-based learning, and I just realized 3 of them are in Jim Sibley's book. Some of you may own this book, Getting Started with Team-Based Learning. It's a wonderful place to start if this is something very interesting to you. And but as I said, in 2014, he moved up to Vancouver Island University, and maybe part of that move was he owns a boat, and to be close to the water and have easy access to his, what I think is a trawler. Is that true, Bill? I think that was the name of the boat. So I've been out on his boat when he lived in Albany. But welcome everyone, and I'm going to turn it over to Bill. This is really a Q&A. I gave him a list of some kind of broad topics that we're going to be just chatting about today. As I said to everybody on email, this is not a basics of TBL. We're not here to really learn the basics. If that's something that's interesting to you, I would love to hear from you. But we are kind of jumping up to a higher level, and which is how to do this online. So I've asked Bill to kind of start us off by kind of giving us a background of the philosophy behind TBL and what makes it work. So go ahead, Bill.
Before I start, let me quickly do a survey of everybody. You can just do a, let's see, let me pull up, can you pull up the tools? Let me see, I need to, how many of you are actually using some parts or all of TBL at the moment? Give me a sense of my audience here. Use the, you can use the raise hand or whatever if you want to indicate. If you all use that tool.
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
Thumbs
Yeah,
up.
raise your hand, use the raise hand tool if you use some parts of team-based learning, some or more. I see only 2 people so far. Is that it? A third, Kim? Yep.
Oh, mine disappeared.
I do that. Okay, yeah. Okay, I see thumbs up. Okay. Okay. So it's a mix, yeah. I was looking in the
There are people across multiple screens here. I can't get them all on the same screen, but there are more people on this second screen as well.
okay. Yeah, and I was looking through the participants list to see who had their hand up over there as well. So one way or another. Okay. So I don't want to go too far into vagaries, because I know that a lot of you who are already practicing team-based learning don't need to do that. But just for those of you that are somewhat newer to it, it's a system of explicit teaching practices that have for a goal to use social functions to get students to practice their critical thinking. And that's in a nutshell what it really is. And the reason that it works is that it gives you specific protocols as a teacher. And if you imitate these protocols and follow them, you don't really have to invent a full-blown pedagogy. You actually are in a pedagogy. And so the idea is that take these 4 or 5 practices, implement them systematically, hewing to the certain principles, and the result will be a pretty engaging classroom where students are functioning at a higher level. That's it. And so I'm going to start by making a statement about those practices include things like the readiness assurance process, which is a clever way of getting students to prepare, and also making it fun. There's an activity design process, which is the protocol is just called 4S, which means the idea is you want students to rehearse their thinking in small groups and then express that thinking across the entire classroom simultaneously, so that the students are able to use that experience of simultaneous reveal to reflect upon their own thinking. And so all the dynamics of team-based learning are based a lot in this idea of immediate feedback. You do something and suddenly, because of your interactions with other people in the classroom, you get this burst of feedback that comes right back to you and says, oh, you think differently than I do. Why? And so what drives team-based learning is this idea of, here's what I think. Everybody show what you think at the same time, and let's see what that looks like. Bam, and now I have data where I can reflect upon my own thinking. So, whoa, I am the only one in the room that thinks this way. Darn. What's wrong with them? What's wrong with me? What do I know that they don't know? What do they know that I don't know? That's the kind of critical reflection that you want to engineer in a team-based classroom. And so all of the practices are designed to put students into that place where they commit to something. That's the critical part. They have to commit to something and make that commitment public, as in, I think we should do this and not that. And we're all now in the room going to say at the same time what we think we should do. Should we do this or that? And the answers all come. Oh, 5 people want to do that, and the other 3 people want to do that. Now we have a discussion that's natural, and this is the natural feedback process that you build into the design, because when 3 teams say the answer is yes, and 2 teams say the answer is no, everybody wants to know why. That's the beauty of the design. You don't have to think to implement this pedagogy. If you follow these protocols, you end up in these moments of great energy in the classroom where students are arguing and debating about whether the answer is yes or no. Simple as that. Okay, that's the principle. So the reason that some of you are probably here today is if you're already a practitioner of team-based learning, then you're thinking, but how do I get that into the online environment? And the answer is you don't. Now, I'm being facetious a little bit, because when you first start looking at being forced to go online, and you're a TBL practitioner, you're looking at your practices, looking at your protocols and thinking, man, this has really been successful in a face-to-face classroom. I've had a lot of fun with this. My students are really enjoying it. I see that the learning is going up. And so I don't want to abandon this pedagogy just because now we've got to move it into online. And so you start looking at, how do I bring this component over? How do I bring that component over? How do I bring that component over? And how do I bring that component over? And then you get into trouble immediately because the technologies do not support a lot of those adaptations in a straight line. So that's the introduction. I'm going to stop there, Joe, and let you push it in any direction you want to go based on that opening statement. Did I put you on the spot? I didn't mean to. I can't hear you.
Well, I said something very witty, and now I can't remember what it was. Well, I don't know where to jump with that. I guess we should just talk about how to do, when you say that you can't do it. So some of our faculty have been struggling and come up with different solutions, which I think have been very interesting to see how the different solutions have been with the IRAT and mainly the TRAT. So I just want to hear, because I've been reading about this. I'm on the TBL listserv and participating in a lot of conversations about it. What makes the IRAT and TRAT work? How do you make that online as best that we can work?
Yeah, and I say that provocatively to say it doesn't work, but I want to make sure that one of the things that my faculty here at VIU started doing when they went into team-based trying to go online is they took each individual component and tried to move it straight into it, and then they were frustrated immediately because it doesn't work. For example, let's take the individual readiness assurance test, which is simply a short multiple choice test on the readings or materials you want students to review before they come to the first class meeting. Well, everybody knows that when you go into an online environment, those tests are no longer, they have to be open book and collaborative. Otherwise, you become the police state, and you don't want to set up your life to where you're having to police. So what our faculty were starting to do was to think, how could I make the test so short, the opening of the test so short that they have no time to go look up answers? Or how do I shut down the room that they're going to use, and the computer in some way, so that they can't collaborate with somebody to find the answer? And the answer is you can't do that. And so you have to abandon the idea that the IRAT, the way you did it in a face-to-face class, is going to be the same online. So for example, the easiest straightforward solution is to say, we're going to abandon the idea of a low-level test, because a low-level test is cheatable, period. In the face-to-face environment, it works because you can say, close your books, now let's take a quick test. Fine. But in the online environment, you can't do that. So you say, well, okay, why don't we change the test? Let's actually turn the test into something closer to a critical thinking test or a low-level application test, so that the student can't look up an answer. They can't simply Google the answer. They can't open their book and go back and find the answer on page 33. They can't do that. They have to actually now do an inference, as in, if this, and this are true, then X must be also true. Or here's a concept. Which of these 10 things is the best example of it, right? And all those 10 things are things they've never seen before. So they have to use their own thinking, their own inference to say, well, this is probably the best example of that concept. All right, so they can't go flipping through the book and say, what did the book say the best example of the concept was? That's totally useless because it doesn't work in the online environment. So there's one example. When you get into the team form of the readiness assurance test, which is where in class, those of you who don't use team-based learning, there's a gimmick, a very successful gimmick. Not all gimmicks are bad. This is a good one, called the scratch-off card, which is basically an answer sheet that students collaborate on. Each team gets one, and they all gather around and they argue about which answer to scratch off. And it allows them then to navigate or negotiate their way to their best guess. And then they scratch it off, and the team celebrates because they got it right, or the team is in agony because they got it wrong. And it's a powerful motivator for the classroom. Well, how do you get that into the online environment? Again, the immediacy part is really, really hard to remanufacture online. If you could do it in Zoom, I mean, we could do it. If I'm gonna do team-based learning with a synchronous element, when we meet in Zoom, we could certainly do it. I could ask you to hold up your team's card, your team's answer, just like this, and you would say, okay, what does your team say? We can do that. But one of the reasons to go online is to eliminate synchronicity. because synchronicity is very hard to do well online because, of course, students have different levels of connectivity, students are in different time zones, students have all these issues, students are trying to take a course and they've got a family running around in the house screaming. All of those things go into making online synchronous experiences very awkward and difficult to count on. You can do them, but I always say to faculty, if you're going to do synchronous elements of your course online, make sure that they're optional. Make them compelling because they're so interesting, but make them optional. Otherwise, students are forced to do things like be there and participate, and at the same time turn around and scream at somebody who has walked into the room and shouldn't be there, right? Not wearing anything, for example, right? So those are issues. But asynchronously, now you're talking about a much more complicated thing. There is a good article out there on some faculty members who have set up some practices for doing it asynchronously. They had some success, but it takes a couple of weeks to do a round. And so now, is it worth it? I don't know. You have to ask yourself that question. So I'm going to pause again, Joe, and let you come back with questions.
Well, and for everybody who's here, if you have questions specifically about what we're talking about right now, you can put it in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and ask. But Bill, for the beginning of our semester, we are starting out face-to-face. So we are going to have sort of a hybrid environment. So our students, for the most part, are going to be on campus. So we will be having the synchronous sessions. We do have some participants here who teach all on completely online courses. So I'm sure they're listening to this in their format as well. So if you are having this hybrid, because we can only meet half of our class typically at a time, would you recommend using some of that precious classroom time for the TRAD? Is it that important?
That's a good question. And it's a hard call. If you're limited in the amount of face-to-face time you have, you want to make sure that you extract the maximum value out of that precious time. Students can do a lot of things online. They can even collaborate outside the classroom online. There's all kinds of things. They have their own tools. They can accomplish amazing things by themselves outside the classroom. What is really powerful about team-based learning, that if you can capture it in a synchronous face-to-face environment, is that collective decision-making and that simultaneous reveal of different teams' experiences. So I recommend, if you've only got half the class available face-to-face, that you focus in on the activity design, the 4S activity designs, because that's where the payoff is. And I want to take a step back and frame this whole conversation a little bit. When you're moving any pedagogy into the online tools present limitations and restrictions or differences. Sometimes they actually open up possibilities that weren't possible in the face-to-face environment. And certainly online, that's a lot of that is going on as well. But you ask yourself, what is the critical impact or value of this pedagogy that I've chosen? And how do I replicate, how do I get closer to that idea in the new medium? Rather than trying to translate over specific practices, the IRAD, the TRAD, the 4S, whatever those practices are, look at the conceptual accomplishments of the conceptual potential of the course, and ask yourself, how do I best get there using the new medium? And so in team-based learning, what makes it work is that it is diverse groups, that is students who represent diversity in a group, 5 or 7 people, who come with different ideas, different levels of experience, different backgrounds, different cultures. And they are asked, on this particular question, we have to accomplish something. We know that the answer is either going to be a yes or a no. In other words, I give you the simplistic example. Should we do this or should we do that? After looking at all the evidence, should we do this or should we do that? And then they have to navigate and negotiate, coming with all of those different values to say, okay, as a group, we'll reach consensus that we should do this, not that. That process of self-analysis within the group to figure out what the best arguments among us are to do this and not that. That's the value of team-based learning, because students learn critical thinking, they learn openness to other ideas, they learn all the things we want them to become in the world through that navigation and negotiation with people who are not exactly like them. And so that's the value. All of the parts of team-based learning, all the components are pushing students toward that moment of navigating and negotiating, reaching an ethical compromise within a situation where there is ambiguity, there is uncertainty, there are holes in our knowledge, but we still have to make a commitment that we're going to do this and not that. All right, if that's what you want to try to replicate using whatever tools are available to you. And so that's why I say the direct line over is less important than thinking about how do I create that situation. Well, you could do that in an asynchronous online environment with a well-written question to a discussion board. One of the problems with online discussions is often the questions, the prompts, are too flat to provoke the kind of navigation and negotiation that you want students to engage in. If I ask students to define something online and ask them to do it as a group, what is the value in that? Why would that even be useful? It's not. That's too low a level. It has to be a higher level of course. It has to be something, it has to be case-based. Given this, given that, given that, given that, and given that, and given these principles that we just read about in chapter 7, given all of these things, here is Susan in a situation now where she's got to find a solution to incorporate all of these variables. What should she do? Should she do this or should she do that? Now we have a question that students can sink their teeth into, and that will work beautifully in an online asynchronous environment. In fact, it might work better in an online asynchronous environment because students have time to think through their ideas, post them, read somebody else's responses, incorporate that, and then post again. That's a beautiful process. That can even be richer than a synchronous in-class discussion where time limits how much analysis students can actually accomplish. Now, I think I took that question a different direction than you intended, Joe, but I'm going to stop and give you a chance to redirect.
No, I love it. I love it all. I will put a little caveat in there that I know Bill will agree with. In order to get that collaborative richness that we're so after in the application exercises, that 4S design, the IRAT serves a real purpose in getting students to be ready to participate in all of that. So I do want to back up a little bit and touch on something that you were talking about, that the IRAT has to be different. And I just want to ask, can you just skip an IRAT and just start with a TRAT? I mean, if it's going to be that high level, just kind of talk me through that. Do you have an IRAT that's at a higher level and then repeat the same thing with a group, or how, if it can be collaborative? So if I'm doing the IRAT, I can call you and just ask you, so should we just count on that, or what do you think?
I think in terms of choreography, the IRAT still has a place in the online, but it's a different purpose, right? It's not really a way of checking to see if they've read anymore, because there's no way to do that, right? Not in any effective, efficient way. But what it can be is a way for a first step of thinking for students to score, to mark, give them a short one, say it's 3 or 4 or 5 questions that they have to go in and post and take a quiz. They can take it using one of the quiz. You use Canvas, I believe, is that right? So go into Canvas, take a quiz, but it's a quiz, it's a 5-question quiz or a 3-question quiz, it could be any number, and have them register in that quiz in a limited amount of time, for example, depending on who your population is, because of course some students may need more time than others, but a reasonable short amount of time. They go in and they post their responses to the 3 or 5 questions, just so that they have committed their answers, so that they enter into that conversation with the team having already something against which to compare when they start to navigate and negotiate. One of the problems in promoting critical thinking is that if you haven't taken the time to mark, how do I think now? Then when you mark how I think later,
Right.
there's no gain, there's no value, because I just morphed. without even becoming aware of it. And self-awareness is what makes critical thinking. So they've got to mark how they think now so that they can then compare it to how they think later. So you can use the IRAT in that format as in, here are 3 questions to test your understanding of what you read. They're higher level questions. Fine. Now you're going to go into your teams and you're going to take the same test again with them. And you're going to compare your thinking on these 3 topics with their thinking on these 3 topics. And you're going to negotiate your way to a consensus response and post that in the discussion board at a given time. Or one of you is going to go in and take that test again for your group. That's fine too. That way, that's an adaptation. I think that works very well for the online for a team-based flavor, if you wish. Everything's got to be shorter though. If you're doing asynchronous, even synchronous, everything's got to be shorter because it just takes so much time for students to process backing and forthing, especially in the asynchronous, but also even in a Zoom session, if you're going to do it synchronously, it just takes more time. It's much harder. So all activities have to be rethought within the time limitations that are provided.
All right, are there any questions specifically on this? I've personally had a lot of questions from faculty about how to do IRAT, TRAT. Is there anybody here that has a question specifically about how they want to do this or how they would do it?
Or how they've done it. If you've got something that you thought worked particularly well, by all means, share it. There actually are, if you want to pursue this in more detail, there are several things that have been written on this topic out there. And I'm sure that Joe or I can point you to them after the session.
I do have a question, and it's I'm new to TBL and I'm thinking about doing it for one of my fall classes. And the polling feature in Zoom seems to be a way to bring in both the virtual students and the face-to-face students. So I'm wondering if your faculty have either used the polling kind of function to have teams report out their answers so that you could create like a collaborative discussion between the virtual and the in-class learners, and if that's been successful or if you actually recommend it at all?
Any tool that you can use to capture that data is fine. I think that works. Our faculty use they use the chat, so the teams post their responses in the chat room. They also the example I just gave you, which is even more dynamic, is to hold up something like this if the class isn't too large, and they simply do exactly what you would do face to face by putting an A, a B, a C, or whatever that is you want on that piece of paper. That works. Or some sort of other, I think depending on how your settings are for Zoom, sometimes that comes up backwards. I can't remember if it's set up backwards. Is it backwards?
Well,
so you have to find a symbol that shows correctly both backwards and forward. So you find letters of the alphabet or numbers that are the same either way, and then they can use those as their symbol to answer if you give them a kind of a multiple choice selection to choose from. But yeah, polling can work. Polling is more effective for individual responses, but I can see how you could adapt it to a team response as well.
other questions? I had a faculty member concerned about, so in the past he used scratch cards, and he was concerned about being in a group and having one member in the group be responsible for entering the answer, say in a Canvas quiz for the group, that he thought that the team would gang up on him. I mean, if it was wrong, I don't know. I actually like the idea of holding up a piece of paper, and I think if you have A, B, C, and D, we can tell what that says, backwards, forwards. But it's, but I also like the idea of using your class time for application exercises instead of running your TRAT.
I think you can spend a lot of time trying to find these workarounds that are not the best use of your time. I think, and that's what you're talking to. You can, sure, we can come up with ways of using that scratch card, but is it worth it? Is it really worth it? You could even do a modified TRAT in Zoom the same way you run a 4S. Why not do it that way? Why not, if you've decided that the TRAT is so important to what you're doing that you really want to maintain it, why not use half the class meeting, say the first 30 minutes, to do a 3-question TRAT and do it the same way we're just doing it, hold up your answer, and then move into application activities for the rest of the meeting. That would also work. But I would say let go of that exact translation of this into that environment. It's just not really worth it. Get back to the idea. I want to make sure that my students understand that collectively, they have to reach consensus out of diversity. That's the magic of team-based learning. I want to force my students to achieve consensus out of diversity and take responsibility for that consensus, even though some of them may still have doubts about it, right? It helps build their moral character to say, I still have my doubts, but I think that I'm going to go with the group here because I think there's a lot of compelling arguments. And if I'm wrong, if I'm right, it will come out down the road and it will alter my relationship with these people. So there's a deeply moral purpose to the team-based learning environment that I think you want to try to preserve by that negotiation and navigation toward a consensus answer out of diversity.
Awesome. I've never thought of it as a moral thing, but.
Hey, Joe, I have a quick kind of approach I've been working with that maybe will help kind of work through this. Like one of the approaches that I've been looking at is having the teams get together via their own Zoom before class, before our face-to-face class sessions, and do a team-based question. Here's the question, here's the possible solutions, or just not even give them possible solutions, but as a team, they've got to come up to that and submit that to Canvas ahead of time. Then the first thing we do when we get back face-to-face is I can bring those up and say, okay, these are what all the teams have done. Let's talk about why some answers are the same and why some answers are different. And that kind of leads me for my first 10 minutes of every face-to-face class sessions, regardless of who's in the class. So that's kind of one of the strategies.
It's a nice idea. I hope it works. The trick will be to make sure, how do you creating that sense of collective commitment so that to make sure that they actually do, all of them get together. And you can't monitor that, and you don't want to monitor that, right? Because then again, we're trying to avoid creating police states. And so you've got to figure out how do you build it in the peer evaluation process then in that situation would be extremely critical for that course. You've got to make sure that they understand that if they don't show up at the Zoom meeting to get together and to fill out the question and to come up with their solutions collectively, they get dinged for that if they don't do it. And that's got to be prominent in the mark, the grade for the course. Yeah.
What I thought was great in the video that was sent out before the Zoom meeting, they have at the mid-semester and end of semester kind of the team peer evaluations, and that's where there's a little bit of level of accountability saying, hey, your teammates are going to give you points based on their perceived, their perception on your level of participation.
Absolutely, it's critical. Go ahead, excuse me.
No problem. Hi, this is Jimmy. If I may add, what I actually do is when I have students do group discussions in small groups, I have them record themselves on Zoom. I think if they have the ability to record themselves and then they submit that video, you can choose to look at it or not look at it, or just glance at it briefly to make sure everyone's present, and then maybe just go through the video real quickly and see that they've been contributing. That's one way to just hold them accountable for that.
I think all of you will find your level of control that's appropriate for you given your personality and your energy and your time. And you'll always have to keep revisiting that. Is this worth it? Is this worth it? And it might be that in that case, it's important enough that you actually do want to have that record and use it. That's great. But again, everybody's going to have to come at this from their own point of view. And we're always in that tension, right? Because the more I control, the more I oversee, the less responsibility they take. And I'm always navigating that myself. I know that I can easily step over that line and shut them down, right? But sometimes they won't get it done if I don't step in there and make sure that something is happening. So yeah, it's a hard call.
I have a question. What's the availability of those scratch cards? Because when I was using them before, you kind of ran out of the cards, and so then you have to become innovative at that point.
Well, Dion, we have scratch cards in our office, but I don't know how. I mean, if you're going to have in-person, yes, we have them for you. So that's fine. Yeah, we have a lot. I'm sorry that we ran out, but must have been a long time ago because we've had a lot for a long time. So we're happy to supply those.
Thank you.
Just backing up to what Jimmy said, I know other faculty with these Zoom breakout rooms have the students, if they're doing this on their own time, just take a photo of them, whoever is in the Zoom. But, you know, this kind of, Bill, what you're saying is how much do we want to police? We're trying to give as much responsibility to the students, and it's trying to find that balance of, you know, how much is enough and how much is too much control, that we are checking in on them, where the peer eval really does, it gives students the ability to influence each other's behavior and have some kind of way to influence their behavior.
Yeah, there's got to be some accountability. The beauty of the face-to-face classroom, of course, it is so self-evident when they're there that it's much less of an issue. Although I do advocate peer evaluation as part of any TBL course. And you can do a soft version or a hard version, but I think it's very important that they do realize that they are accountable to each other. It's more important that they're accountable to each other than they are to meet the instructor. I don't care, quite frankly. I mean, I do care, but I don't care in the way of a policeman, right? If they decide not to come to class or not to do any work, I don't care. I'm sorry for them, right? But it doesn't bother me. I don't lose sleep over it. I don't worry that they don't love me because they didn't come to class. They just decided not to come to class for reasons that I assume were justified. They had more important things to do. The golf course had a tea time at that hour, and I really didn't want to waste it, and so I needed to get over there. And therefore, Dr. Roberson, I just decided it was more important to do that than to come to your. I don't care. I really don't. But I've designed it so that they've got to be there in order to be successful. That's the secret. And so that's why I don't care. I keep using that word. I use that word facetiously. You understand that. I do care, but I don't really care that they make choices that I don't agree with, right? And the whole course is set up as these are choices that you, the student, are making. You can choose to be here, and you can choose to participate, and you can choose to do it, or you can choose not to. It will all come out in the wash as far as I'm concerned. And the course needs to be designed so that there are natural accountabilities built in where you don't have to issue those controls. For example, in the face-to-face class, I'll just give you one more. I'm going on infinitely here. In the face-to-face class, I want to make sure that I haven't got any required attendance. Absolutely zero required attendance. Students can choose to come or not to come. If they don't come that day, there's about 5 points of something that they don't get. So the accountability is naturally built in, and they can't get that through a makeup. There's my accountability, and therefore, if they've chosen not to come, I'm assuming that they did so as thinking adults, that they didn't, and they are adults. I want to treat them as adults. So I tell them at the beginning of the class, look, you might have a tea time that you don't want to miss. That's fine. It's a choice that you're going to make, and I'm not going to question that choice. Here's how it's designed, though, and here's how you actually demonstrate success in the course, and here's how you get your score. So,
Joe, I have a question, and it's a little bit related to this. As we have the ability to have a little bit of face-to-face time with students, and thinking of team-based learning, how much, from a university standpoint, should we allow close contact in the classroom to do team-based learning? You know, I mean, we're going through some pretty extraordinary measures to keep students separated. And should we be very conscious of, okay, any team-based learning activities in the classroom still need to be distanced? For lack of a better term.
you need a big classroom, won't you?
Yeah.
I don't have an answer to that. I think you're going to be making that call locally as to how much social distancing is going to be necessary given the conditions in your neighborhood. And so that's going to be different in September than it is right now, I suspect. I don't know. California is up and down, right? I know that California is struggling with a surge, and that's probably going to factor in to what you actually do. Is it possible to create a bubble with the team? I don't know. Maybe that's the way. Quarantine them for 2 weeks together as a team, and then say you're a safe bubble. You can collaborate now in close distance. But I don't know.
Mike, thinking about your question and comment, I've done some thinking about that. Just the idea of paper in the classroom. So you could, I mean, just different scenarios is, you know, the question, whatever it is, application exercise could be up on the screen. And each individual student has their own piece of paper that they're working on. What they're not going to be able to do is what we see in those videos where they're getting close together and putting their heads together and writing on the same piece of paper, or even a central whiteboard, that they can't be that close together from what we're being told. They can't share markers, they can't share pens. So just thinking through, can you have separate sheets of paper? Either they're just working on note paper, the scenario or whatever case study is up on the screen, or it's printed, but each person has a copy, but they do work together. They do come up to a single answer. They do answer as a group. And that can be on Zoom, that can be in person. You know, we have those ABCD cards, or, you know, you can just write it out on a piece of paper, but that's harder to see. It's easier when you have a color, like A is red, B is blue, that's easier to see. But I guess my main point is, now's the time to think about those things. They are solvable. They will not, as Bill said, look exactly the same or feel the same, but they can move in the same direction and get us kind of to the same point. I would lean, I'm really taking in, Bill, what you're saying about not holding their hand too much and letting them struggle and letting them be accountable and letting them function more as adults. And I can see for myself wanting to lean to the other way, that, you know, I have to help them, and, oh, I am very concerned that so-and-so is not there and whatever. And it's good for me to hear that maybe I don't need to be quite like that.
Yeah, if you design the system well, it should be self-managing and self-controlling, I think, without your having to actually become that person that cares in that way too much. But Mike, you put your finger on it. It might actually be easier to do it in Zoom than to do it in the classroom, now that you make that case. So yeah, I hadn't thought about that before, so thank you for pointing that out. I actually think you get a lot more energy out of a Zoom breakout room than you could in a classroom. What you might need to do, though, is make sure all of your students have Zoom accounts so that you can preload them into Zoom, so that when they come into the classroom, you actually don't have to sort them out one by one. You actually you can do that in certain versions of Zoom. You can do that. You can set up teams in advance because you've got their account numbers.
Yeah,
but you've also got to make sure they all have those accounts. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know what to say about your face-to-face problem. They were shouting across the room, 2 yards apart. Is that the idea?
Yes, just about.
We're in Canada now, so it's meters. So.
Yeah, and also the other downside of it is that you only got half the class there, right? If you're going to alternate, so the Zoom, the team meetings would be, you'll get a lot more diversity of perspective if you've got them in Zoom and everybody's there at the same time. So that's another thing to factor in. I don't know what the value of the face-to-face becomes in the current environment, because it's just like, it's going to be almost obligatory, individualized, more so than it would normally be, right? In spite of your best intentions, it's probably going to have more of an individual flavor. And what do you do at that time? I don't know.
Well, so thinking along those same lines, Chris Sloan, who is one of our nursing professors and uses TBL, sent me some of her questions because she was working at a hospital today. She asked, what are your feelings about teams in which some members are online on Zoom and some are in class? So you have some distance or near and far. If you're going to run your class that way, should teams be mixed where some are in person and some are online, or should the permanent teams be all online and all in the class?
I don't have a definitive answer to that. I have a gut response, in that it'll be more efficient for students if it's either or. In other words, okay, they understand the game. We're all going to be in Zoom. We're all going to do this collaboratively in Zoom and blah, blah, blah. Or we're all face-to-face. For them to toggle back and forth between face-to-face. Now, students are more clever at this than I am, so they may have a different feel altogether. I would put it to the students. They may have a thought about it. two students sitting there in the classroom and interacting with three other students online in Zoom, that might be fine for them. I would find it distracting. I would start to feel that I would be biased toward the people present against the people who are not present. But that may just be a generational thing. It might be that your students have already blown past that concern and it's not really an issue for them, but that would be something that in the back of my head if I were doing that.
Well, so in the kind of class Chris is talking about, so for every class meeting, half of her students are on Zoom and half are in person. And so if you had, and all teams are permanent, so if some of your teams on, say, Monday, your group A is in person and your group B is online, then on Wednesday, then they switch.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking when you say to be prejudiced against, or whatever word that you used.
Biased, yeah.
Biased, you know, if you have, let's say 4 groups that are in person that day and 4 groups that are online, as opposed to every group is a mixture of the two, I don't know which one would create less bias.
I don't think that's the issue of bias that I was thinking about. I was thinking about it in a mix within a group. I think there are going to be issues, nevertheless, because of connectivity for the people, just like we have issues here, right? And it's going to be a lot more pronounced for students because they're going to have such varying bandwidth access compared to us. We professionals tend to invest in that kind of thing, and not every student will have. So I was just saying that probably some issues will come up and that it will by default become a little bit more of an advantage for those students in class because they'll be able to respond a little more reliably. But again, all these are suppositions. It might be that this works itself out, and it could be that it's only a problem in the first round. It might be that we're adaptable. Who knows? We can't see the future for this. It's worth trying.
Has anybody had any experience at this with the near far with groups?
Can I add something in there, Joe?
Hey, Heidi. Sure.
Hi. Let me lower my hand here. So because we have the issue not only of that social distancing, but the fact that anybody could become ill or possibly exposed to somebody with COVID and has to be isolated, we have to be able to swiftly change anybody in a group into the offline or, in class or online. So I feel like the grouping should be able to handle all case scenarios. And I just wanted to give a comment too about the paper passing back and forth. I mean, that could be problematic as well. So I was thinking of having students, when they're working in teams or whatever, writing on their own paper and then taking a photograph and uploading it into Canvas. So, and you might have like one person be the record taker for the final group answer or something, but nobody's exchanging papers physically.
And then how do you facilitate the discussion? So they upload their answer and then, because we need that simultaneous report where we're having in class. Is that what we're talking about?
Right. So I'm thinking of in class, if we're having some discussion where, how do we solve the problem if it's an either or something like that, then they have to have that discussion, and then they can, the group is submitting their comments, and then we can have groups present, or we can put it on a discussion board or something like that. But there has to be a way to bring in everyone, whether they're physically there or just virtually there.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that you got to be prepared for that. No matter how carefully you choreograph this to try to make it as easy as possible, something's going to happen to complicate it. You can count on that. So it'd be kind of nice if some of you would agree to experiment with different ways of doing it and come back to the group later on and say what worked and what didn't.
Couldn't we facilitate the conversation by using the doc cam? If you have half the class present and half the class on Zoom, the Zoom candidates would be able to see, I would believe, the doc cam, right. And then the person's present would be able to see that, and you could facilitate the conversation using that. Isn't that a possibility?
And how are you getting information onto the dot cam?
I'm standing at the podium.
But where's the information coming from? What are you putting on the dot cam? This is answers from groups. That's what, where, how is it getting from the group?
Well, we listen to the response. I like the Zoom groups. That's easy. The in-classroom groups, yet to be seen. I don't know how that's going to work. But once I have the responses, I can just write it in on the transfer, whatever the thing is I'm using, the sheet of paper, and then put that on the dot cam so that everybody can see it. And then we could continue our discussion that way.
That would work. That doesn't work for everyone. I mean, it just depends on what the answers are. If it's a formula they have to create or a, you know, something that they're creating, the idea that you are going to write it all down on a dot cam, that doesn't work. But if it's just A, B, C, and D, multiple choice, that's...
Yes, that's what I meant. Uh-huh.
Do we know that the dot cam will broadcast to Zoom?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
You have to switch it over, but...
like a share screen function.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Hey, this is Donna. I'm just going to jump in and tell you that we do facilitate this with a embedded Padlet often, and have teams go in and put the Padlet up on the screen. And because it's a live update, groups just go in and they can add a video, they can add a file, they can add whatever they want, and a little post, and they can even vote. You can set up columns for voting as well.
Awesome. So for the, I don't know if everybody could understand, Donna, Padlet, P-A-D-L-E-T, is a web tool that you can use that can help facilitate that. That's great. Thanks, Donna.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Since we're just at the beginning of this process, there's a lot of people are working on an online scratch off, and there's a couple of variations out there. I haven't seen one yet that I liked, but you should be aware that there are several people. It's kind of like the vaccine research going on right now. Everybody's desperate to find a solution, and so there's a lot of work going on to say, what's the best way to do it? They're all kind of clunky so far, but they're working on it.
I still have some questions from Chris Sloan that I promised her I would get through, so let me just read one, which is kind of going back to the IRATs. As I said, Chris teaches nursing. She teaches pediatrics and nursing, and she teaches pharmacology using TBL. So she asked, what's the downside, if any, to having students do IRATs, TRATs every class period? We meet only once a week. The trade-off is doing it every 2 weeks with twice the content needing to be covered.
Well, when you're doing in a face-to-face class, you're trying to put that kind of accountability control, compress it, because the real learning occurs when students take information and apply it.
Right.
The learning doesn't occur when you test them on having read something. That really isn't very deep, and that should not be the goal. And when you start testing all the time, especially in a nursing program, students get all bent out of shape about testing, and they come to think that the tests are really what it's all about, and in fact, it's not. So it's very easy to misrepresent the learning for a course by overly frequent use of the IRAT and TRAT, which is why we advocate really, really, really only having 4, 5, 6 modules per course. So that means you only do that process, the IRAT, TRAT process, 4, 5, or 6 times per course. It helps students understand that, oh, okay, this is just a step along the way to get ready for the big stuff, right? Otherwise, they get confused and they think that, and they'll start obsessing about those tests. So I would say that's the reason, even in an online environment, I would say every other week would be already plenty to accomplish the goal, which is, are you taking the time to look at the materials that you were provided so that you will be ready to participate in these activities where you're going to practice your thinking? Yeah.
So if Chris does that, and so week 4 she has the IRAT, week 5 she doesn't, week 6. In week 6, are we covering week 5 and 6 or just week 6? And they have some other something or whatever for week 5.
Yeah, you know, it's hard. The question is secondhand, and if she were here in the conversation, what I would say to her is take 2 steps back from your content and stop thinking about it as week to week. Look at the chunking of your content into logical modules. As in, here's a cluster of ideas that I want students to experience in one bunch. And so I'm going to have to give them all their readings around that cluster, that deeply related cluster of ideas. And then I'm going to test them on that. And then we're going to look at scenarios and cases and situations where those ideas are relevant. And we're going to practice our thinking by looking at nursing situations and saying, okay, what would you do in this situation? Given what you read, what would you do here, right? So I would say that thinking about the rhythm in terms of week by week is going to get you into a trouble, because it's now looking at an alignment of mechanics rather than an organic arrangement of ideas for the course.
Awesome. One of the shortcomings that we have here is we do not have iPeer or any way to help facilitate peer evaluation. We don't have it. I mean, I hope that we can get it, but I've started that conversation many times with our IT people and just haven't gotten anywhere. But do you have any, I mean, I know you use iPeer. iPeer just, for those, I doubt anybody even knows what that is, but it's just well, I'll let Bill tell us what it is. It's an online way to do peer evaluations. I don't know if it does anything else other than that, does it?
No, it was designed for team-based learning. Up at University of British Columbia, it's open source. So if you have a server and somebody with IT skills on your campus that's willing to do it, you can have it for free. And basically what it is a system where students can go in and they log in and they see all of their team members who are scheduled in an event. And the event is an evaluation event or a feedback event. So that midterm, for example, to go in and they click on the event and they're all their team members and they're asked to provide feedback to each member. They close it, leave it, and then a week later when all the results are in, they can go back in and they can see what everybody said, and it's anonymized. And you as the instructor can go in and collect that data and organize it, do what you want to with it. But it's very efficient. It's only efficient to learn if you have a small class, it's not worth it. If you have a larger class, and when I start saying larger, I'm now talking about getting up to around 25 students or more, you're starting to see the benefits of it. But you can still do it in Canvas by having students submit their responses to 5 students, their teammates, in a couple of sentences, and you can cut and paste that pretty quickly through all the students, and each student can get a report. I use a spreadsheet when I do it manually without using iPeer. I just have a spreadsheet where I cut and paste into the spreadsheet, into these cells, and then I just create that little report and send it back to students. It doesn't take that long, so it should not be the reason not to do peer evaluation. It's a good idea to get iPeer down the road if you can, but it's still not the only way to do this. And the electronic tools you have make it relatively doable, even though it's a little bit tedious.
Great. I just encourage everyone, peer eval, it's good to have one right in the middle of the year and one at the end of the year. And best practice, as far as I know, maybe Bill will speak to this, is to have it count for something in their grade. That
absolutely.
By the second time, that the first time not, because you want to give them a chance to get better without it affecting their grade. But you know, hearing from your colleagues, hey, you need to speak up or you need to show up, can have a big impact, where if the teacher tells them that, it doesn't have as much impact.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Some students will be traumatized by the fact you'd be amazed, they've never gotten honest feedback from people. And it's the first time, and they go out of their tree because they can't believe that somebody could say that about them. And it's a reality check for students. It's a great tool. So yeah, we strongly advocate no more than 5% of the total score for the course, I think, is appropriate. 5 or 10, maybe 10%, depending on the course. You might have some courses that students are involved in a group project and they do a lot of team group activities, and maybe that's a little bit more, but it's just to put it there so that the students have the comfort of knowing I'm in control. I am not going to be a victim. And you tell students at the beginning of the course, this is your way of managing your fellow students' behavior. You actually will be able to influence it. I'm assuring you can do this. So take it and use it seriously. Students, and so you have to take the time to show them, to explain to them why. right? They always think that you're the only person in the room that has any judgment. And here you're saying to them, no, I trust your judgment. You need to be honest with your peers. And it's more important that you be honest with each other than that you be honest with me.
Well, and this also highlights the value of having permanent teams. I know that some people don't see the value in that, but I do. Just your teams are building, they're getting to know each other. They can push each other. They can rely on each other. It's just a very different thing than if you're just constantly changing and talking to somebody new that, you know, you're just getting to know. We do have a couple of questions still about the IRAT, TRAT. So I realize there's some people that don't even know what we're talking about, but it's an individual readiness assurance test. So you start out with the individual student being accountable for their own work, and then typically you're repeating the exact same test with a team. In this day with Zoom and online, it's going to be interesting to see, because I've read some people are changing the test. They're definitely making it more challenging because we're doing open book. But that kind of, you're going to have to play around with that. I'm wondering if Bill has anything to say about that, that some people are not using the exact same test, but I'm hearing you say you're making it even shorter, like 2 or 3, 4 questions instead of what typically we've done 10.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you could have them take a 10-question IRAT test, again, knowing that it's open book and therefore it needs to be more than just simply go find the facts.
Right.
It needs to be some sort of low-level application, as in what's the best example of, you know, this kind of thing. But why not have that kind of test, 10 questions, and then the teams are responsible for doing 3 of those as a team rat? Why not do it that way?
Yeah, that's good.
So you still get the best of both worlds. You can hold them accountable for their thinking, for having read through the content. Did you basically read it and understand this? And so here's 10 questions to check your understanding of what you read. And now we're going to, the 3 hardest questions, the last 3, which are more like activities, we're going to use those as a basis for a team rat, right? So I think that's one way to do it. That's how some people are managing it, trying to deal with the fact that especially if it's asynchronous, if you're relegated to doing it asynchronously as a discussion activity, then it needs to be fewer questions, because otherwise it just takes too long to work all the way through all the questions.
So in an online class, what happens at the end of a TRAT? How do you facilitate going over questions that people got wrong?
I think using any of the tools that you would typically, I don't know what you use for lecture capture there, whatever the equivalent is. What is it?
Zoom.
Using Zoom for lecture capture too. Some universities are doing, they have other tools called personal capture, some other tools out there. Whatever PowerPoint might even work. But you want to make a short recording where you talk through to students. I think it's more effective if it's a voice rather than an essay and an email, but it could be an email. But it's simply a little talk through. I said, okay, everybody, here are the results. Let me observe a few things. Everybody got these right. A couple of you struggled with this one. Let me talk about that for just a minute. Just wrap it into your usual little mini lecture that's pulling together the ideas of the course. I think that's all you need to do.
I think the university purchased Screencast-O-Matic.
Okay.
Tool that's available for everyone.
Yes, that's true.
There, that would be the tool to use. Yeah, whatever the instructor finds easiest to use.
Well, we've got a few more minutes, and I want to, well, we don't actually. We're at over 2 o'clock, and we haven't really talked at all or very little about 4S design. So can you just briefly give us the philosophy behind and why 4S works, what it is and why it works?
Well, Larry Michelson, who is the person that's responsible for putting together this model, the team-based learning model, the protocols of team-based learning, he told me a couple of years ago, I ran into him at a conference, and we were talking about the fact that team-based learning isn't the best description of this model. And we agree that it really should be called decision-based learning. Because it is socially driven, and the power of the learning comes from the relationships that develop in the course, those permanent teams that Joe was talking about. And the permanency of them is critical, because students won't take on each other when they are not permanent, when they haven't learned to be a team. So, but the power of the model is, and this is where the 4S activities come into play. That is all students in the class, all the teams are given the same problem. All of them are asked to reach a specific choice. I call it a decision, right? And then they're asked to respond, present, and reveal their responses simultaneously. Those were 3 of the S's. The 4th S is it needs to be something significant. It can't just be a blah, blah question. It really needs to be something critical to the learning of the course. But it's the decision-making process that forces the critical thinking, right? And so without the decision, if you could have an open-ended question to students as a team task, and there might be some learning, but they're not really confronting their thinking. Because some students will back up and say, oh, okay, you guys go ahead and do that. I'll just listen, right? But if you make it clear that it's got to be a simultaneous consensus-based response, it's going to be going public, and you're all going to be accountable and implicated in that response. Now we have the basis for some learning. All right, I'm going to take a sidestep here and say that one of my favorite definitions of critical thinking is self-corrective learning, self-corrective thinking. So the idea is that you have to do something in order to have something to look at, to analyze it for critical thinking to occur. And so the beauty of the decision-making process as a driver of design is that it cements, we think this. We are so committed to this answer that we're going to go public with it. We think that if this, and this are true, then that mountain is going to collapse in 3,000 years. Not 2,000 years, not 10,000 years. That mountain is going to collapse in 3,000 years. We know it, we believe it, and here's the reasons for it. And then some other team over here says, no, we think it's going to collapse in 1,000 years. Tell us why. Oh, because blah, blah, blah. Okay, we think it's going to collapse in 10,000 years. Now we have that argument. And because I said we think it's going to be 3,000 years, I have that marker in the sand, so to speak. And now everybody in the room is giving me feedback on that statement, and I'm collecting their feedback from me, and I'm giving them feedback on mine. We're all learning from that process, but it's got to be really specific and concrete in that way. And so there's got to be a way of structuring in this commitment. We think it's going to be this, but not that. That's the critical design element of a good 4S task. Yeah. We think it's this, not that. Really clear. Now, maybe you give them 5 options. We think it's this, not that, not that, not that. That's fine too, whatever, but it has to be that clear. And once you get them into that mode of planting their commitment, now they move into critical thinking because they're getting all this feedback and they're re-examining their own thought. So keep that in mind when you're designing any team activity, any group activity. What is the output that puts them on the spot? That forces them to make their thinking visible because it's in the form of a commitment to a specific position that then is public and they have to defend vis-a-vis the other groups in the room. That's the philosophy behind 4S.
Awesome. Well, guys, we're going to wrap this up. We're over 2 o'clock. Fortunately, Bill's in the same time zone that we're in, which is lovely. But I want to thank everyone for coming. But I especially want to thank Bill. Bill, I just really appreciate your time and the way that you speak into this. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you later. Bye.
Bye, all.
Joe, before I leave, can I say something to you at least? I've been thinking more about how we could share out responses from the teams. We can do the Google Share Drive, right? We can have a Google Doc or something, and if they're taking photographs of their responses, they can just upload the image of the response. They can't change it, even if somebody else has uploaded theirs, right? I mean, it's kind of, they're stuck with it. And we can go through all the responses just on the projection system.
Absolutely. Yeah, Google Slides, Google Doc, it just depends on which one would, but that's a great way. It's
right, and they can still upload into Canvas or wherever else, but it's easy for them to just upload whatever they wrote down and we can just project it.
Right, and then you can facilitate. I mean, we didn't even talk about facilitating discussion, but that's where, well, I should say Bill did talk about that.
Yes, he did.
lot of this where people have to defend their answer and they realize mistakes that they've made or things they didn't think about. So I think that's great, Heidi. I hope you do that. Let me know how it goes.
I will do that. Thank you for this. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Heidi.
Good to meet you all. Okay.
Back to the boat.
Yes, back to the boat.
Bill, thanks so much. This was awesome. This was exactly what I wanted. It's just got everybody thinking, and I'm sure I'm going to hear from a lot of them. I actually am not sure that I have read the articles that you're talking about moving this. Maybe I have, and I'm just drawing a blank. So when you get a chance, is it on your website or?
It's on Jim Sibley's website. If you go to, I think he calls it learntbl.ubc.ca.
Yeah, I know where that is.
Okay, and he's got a whole section in there on technology and online learning. And he's got several articles. The one that I find is useful, especially for those who are struggling with an asynchronous implementation, is by a couple of academics called Palsole and Awalt. P-A-S-O-L-E, and Sune Palsole and Carolyn Awalt, A-W-A-L-T.
Yeah. Okay, I'll look.
And I think he's got it in that list of resources. If he doesn't, let me know and I'll send you a copy of it. Okay, but it's a nice, because it's very, very granular about how they decided to try to do an asynchronous online team-based learning course and the choices that they made and what happened. And I think it's great reading for anybody that gets serious about it. Yeah.
Great.
Nice to meet you, Bill. I hear so much about you from Joe, and so I think you surpass expectations. So yeah,
Okay.
very nice to finally meet you.
Thank you, Gail. Yeah. Maybe we'll see each other face to face one of these days. Who knows?
That'd be great.
San Diego. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
All right.
All right.
All right.
Everyone.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.